Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about the people, places, and organizations that shape Milwaukee.
10 years ago this month, a Milwaukee police officer shot and killed Sylville Smith in the Sherman Park neighborhood. Protesters filled the nearby streets for days after the shooting.
Here at 35th and Burleigh, you can see the O'Reilly Auto Parts store completely engulfed in flames here behind me. Hundreds of people have gathered here tonight to protest that officer-involved shooting.
The officer was later acquitted on murder charges. The Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service has compiled a series of stories about how Sherman Park has changed in the decades since the unrest. Lake Effect's Sam Woods sat down with two of the reporters on the project, beginning with criminal justice reporter Devin Blake. Blake's story examines what the economic and public safety data say about how the neighborhood has changed since 2016.
So, Devin, in your analysis of these three census tracts in Sherman Park, you found that unemployment declined about 5% since 2016. But did that also mean that incomes and home ownership rates improved as unemployment improved?
No, and see, that was the most interesting thing, or kind of the most compelling part of it, where as certain indicators went up, like educational attainment, the share of adults aged 25 and older holding at least a bachelor's degree increased from a little over 7% to almost 9%, and the employment rate declined from about 20% to about 16%. So you have these things that people tell you to do, and people say, like, this is how you become economically mobile. They have done these things, but it hasn't paid out in terms of stability, you know? So, like, at that same time, poverty rose across every age group. And just for seniors that were 65 and older, it almost tripled the poverty rate from about 16% to 33%.
So another indicator of stability is home ownership. And you found that home ownership in Sherman Park also went down, which means there are more renters in the neighborhood. So with more people renting, what's happened to the price of rent?
If you are adjusting for inflation, inflation-adjusted median rent increased from roughly $1,130 to $1,200. So people are paying more share of their income to rent now. And there are more renters, more people renting. In 2024, it was 7 in 10 occupied homes were rentals.
How would you characterize the story here? Because it seems like there's kind of a mix of positive and negative news here for a neighborhood. You know, on the one hand, employment is up, educational attainment is up, but incomes are down, home ownership rates are down, poverty rates are up. So what do we make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think, you know, that could be like several books by itself, you know, but I think it's just the disconnect between people's decisions for their lives and outcomes. And, you know, it happened in this very specific way in Sherman Park. But again, there are, even at the census data that I looked at, there were other things that were positive. And, you know, this is also separate from the question of what does this mean for public safety? Because as economic life is fluctuating and telling this mixed story, at the same time is happening in terms of homicides and non-fatal shootings, just gun violence in general, and other violent crimes.
Well, I'm glad you got into that because my next question was about notable statistics regarding public safety. So can you talk more about what you found?
So homicides and non-fatal shootings didn't really steadily improve after 2016, but they didn't steadily get worse. Homicides and shootings, went up during the pandemic and have declined since then. And then we also looked at a sliver of like shot spotter data and how the proportion of shot spotter alerts, how much of that is happening in Sherman Park. But there are things that the data also can't really show, which is, the importance of these stories as a series, which is like, how does it feel to live in Sherman Park now versus 2016? What does it mean that certain forms of gun violence have gone down? And so Von Mays, who is a well-known organizer and activist here in Milwaukee, he also is a violence interrupter for the city's Department of Community Wellness and Safety. He said that the relationship between police and the community in Sherman Park is leaps better. And you can't find that on a census. You know what I mean? So the data tells an important story, and it kind of can guide certain conversations, but it's certainly not the whole story.
So community control of the police was a consistent demand from Sherman Park protesters after police killed Sylville Smith in 2016, echoing similar calls after Milwaukee police killed Dontre Hamilton in 2014, and foreshadowing similar calls when an off-duty Milwaukee police officer killed Joel Acevedo in 2020. Now, nominally, the Fire and Police Commission is supposed to serve this function, as it is made up of civilian members and used to be able to set police department policy. But Devin, how has the Fire and Police Commission and its responsibilities and its powers changed since 2016?
Yeah, so a major change came after the enactment of Act 12, which fundamentally changed what the Fire and Police Commission can do. Before 2023, the Fire and Police Commission had a pretty rare power for a civilian body, which was they could create and modify police department policy. And there were really, as I understand it, after speaking with the former chair of the Fire and Police Commission, there were really only a handful of places where that was the case. Since Act 12, it is no longer the case. The Fire and Police Commission can recommend, but it can't create policy. It can't modify policy. The main check against the police chief's policy is the policy can be modified by a 2/3 vote of the Common Council. But those are, very, very different. And at the time of the enactment of Act 12, the chair and the vice chair of the Fire and Police Commission resigned because of it.
So, Devin, given your combination of data reporting and traditional on-the-ground reporting for this story, as well as reporting from the entire staff at the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service, what does the future hold for Sherman Park?
Well, one main thing is that, and this is something that my colleague at Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service can talk about, Princess Byers. She writes about housing, and Mayor Johnson's administration is really kind of keeps going back to and pointing to as something that has kind of tried to address these economic indicators, especially housing, and really expand the number of homeowners of color. Is the Year of Housing initiative. And citywide, that number has gone up, but that hasn't trickled into Sherman Park yet. So I think even something like that affects these other indicators too, right? Like if you have stable, predictable housing, that's much easier to keep a job, to get a job, to keep a job. Just less stress overall. If more people are housed, there's less violence. Like I think that alone, like if housing could be tackled, that would help Sherman Park catch up to the rest of the city in that regard.
That was Milwaukee Neighborhood News reporter Devin Blake speaking with Lake Effect's Sam Woods. Another neighborhood news reporter, PrincessSafiya Byers, chronicled one of the city's prime examples of rebirth since the Sherman Park Uprising, the Sherman Phoenix. Today, the Sherman Phoenix is an incubator for new businesses. The bank that used to be there in 2016 was set ablaze during protests following the police killing of Sylville Smith. Byers sat down with Lake Effect's Sam Woods to discuss what happened next.
In the 2 years between August 2016 and when the Sherman Phoenix eventually opens, what happened in those 2 years?
Yeah, I believe there were a lot of community conversations kind of about how the folks in the neighborhood and folks that supported the folks in the neighborhood wanted to rebuild. And over a series of conversations, it was decided that it would become the Sherman Phoenix, which is a marketplace and business hub for small businesses.
And who are the people behind the Sherman Phoenix?
Joanne Sabir and Julie Kaufman are the co-founders of the Sherman Phoenix.
Did you talk to any of them for the story?
I did. I talked to Joanne Sabir for the story, and she talked about how proud she is that the project is kind of living without them. Neither of them are still included in the workings of the project. But yeah, she's excited that it's still around.
Say more about how you kind of interpreted how she felt about seeing that this creation is still here and what it means to her.
Yeah, as she explained it to me, like it was kind of a thought child, almost an experiment. And it's kind of grown far past with what she or Julie could have imagined it would grow into. So she's just excited that it's still around and thriving and existing without either of their help.
Tell me about some of the businesses that got their start in the Sherman Phoenix.
Yeah, there are a bunch. I feel like notably Funky Fresh Spring Rolls, people like them. They no longer have a brick and mortar, but they're like in grocery stores now. But they were initially a restaurant inside of the Sherman Phoenix. The Classic Shop is a clothing brand that started inside of the Sherman Phoenix. Honeybee Sage is a tea shop and wellness apothecary that started inside of the Sherman Phoenix. So there's been a few to come out.
Were you able to talk to any of these businesses, their owners, their founders?
Yeah, I talked to Miss Adidra Greer with Confectionately Yours, who got their start inside of the Sherman Phoenix. They weren't a business prior to the Sherman Phoenix opening. So that was their first spot. And now she has left the Sherman Phoenix and has a business on MLK Drive.
And what did that mean to her to have a space to incubate and then eventually kind of move out of the household, so to speak?
Yeah, as she explained it to me, it was really good for her as a beginner business to be able to be in community with so many other business owners and learn from them, and just to have the space to start and people to frequent her business. And she said she learned about, some of the hard parts of being a business owner because COVID did hit while she was inside of the Sherman Phoenix. But yeah, she said it was great learning from other business owners and just getting to be a part of community in that way. She does still support like the Sherman Phoenix and all that it does. I guess it's important to note that we spoke in the middle of a very busy day. So she was up and down. But I feel like she was most excited, very giddy when she was talking about how Miss Joanne Sabir offered her a space inside of the Sherman Phoenix, and how she didn't really know what she was doing as far as being a business owner. And Joanne told her, like, we'll help you. And so she really speaks highly to how they were willing to help small business owners just get started and be okay. She even was really excited talking about how kind of the pandemic hit and it was really hard, but she didn't believe that her business was going to end as the result of the pandemic. And it didn't. We talked about some of the ways she survived through the pandemic through donating a bunch of cookies to organizations and schools and figuring out ways to still bake for people even though they couldn't be in community together. And yeah, she talked a little bit about, some of those hardships. But for the most part, she was just excited to talk about the opportunity she was giving and how it led her to be where she is now.
So after talking to some businesses like Confectionately Yours that have called the Phoenix home, what is your sense about what the Sherman Phoenix represents?
I feel like what I got out of talking to Miss Adidja and Joanne and Mr. Alan Moore is it's more community than it is business. Obviously, it's business, but they all really spoke highly of the community that they were able to build in the space, the people they're able to meet, and the things they're able to learn from one another by being in such close proximity.
So, Princess Safiya, I want to give you the chance to have the final word here. So, we've heard from your colleague Devin Blake, who dug into the data with some economic indicators of how Sherman Park has developed over the last 10 years. And, of course, we've talked to you about what has risen from the ashes of what was a burned BMO Harris Bank. So, given all that we've talked about here, what does the Sherman Phoenix represent?
From looking at all the reporting the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service has done on the Sherman Park neighborhood this year, I would say that there are very obviously still some challenges, but in a very Milwaukee way, community is doing the best that it can.
That was PrincessSafiya Byers, housing and basic needs reporter for the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. We also heard from Devin Blake, criminal justice reporter for the Neighborhood News. They spoke to Lake Effect's Sam Woods about the reporting on a 10-year retrospective of the Sherman Park Uprising.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.